Hey, everybody, this conversation ran a little longer than expected, so we actually split this episode into 2 parts. So today, episode 9 is part 1 of our conversation about spiritual leadership.
Welcome to the Stand Like Men podcast. I'm Logan Ingram.
I'm Daniel Trollenberg.
And today we are going to explore what it means to live out true masculinity. The podcast is about us becoming the men that God wants us to be and encouraging y'all to join along the way.
Yeah, and we'd love it if you would subscribe and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Leave us a comment in the video. That'd be great. And if you have a question or comment or snide remark, you can send that to standlikemen@gmail.com.
Welcome to episode 9. We are covering spiritual leadership in this episode. All right, so Daniel, marriage is clearly an important part of our lives and
Yes.
a lot of other men.
Agreed.
And I believe that biblically we have roles to fulfill within that, one of them being the spiritual leader. How do you view your role as the spiritual leader, and what steps are you taking or have you taken in the past that you believe is fulfilling that role?
I kind of view it as my role is the opposite of a plumber. So a plumber's number one rule is poop flows downhill, right? As a leader, I view it as poop flows uphill. Anything that goes wrong, it comes back to me. It's my responsibility to identify the issues that are going to happen and prevent them. If my son makes a mistake or does whatever, I didn't train him well enough. If my wife is struggling, it's because I did not provide enough to begin with. I didn't support her in the way that she needed supported before she got to where she was struggling. And so ultimately, I view everything comes back to me as the leader. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that are like, we can kind of get into the differences between leader and a boss. Where a boss it's everybody else's fault. It's everybody else's, it's their responsibility to do their own thing. Where a leader is like, okay, well, you're under my charge and I need to help you succeed. I need to do what I need to do to help you succeed. So that's kind of where I take it, where if I'm the leader of my family, I need to take responsibility ahead of time and not just work on cleanup, but I need to start working on preventative maintenance. If that may not be the right word, but I think you know what I mean, where it's, I put work in at the beginning of it rather than try to clean up the mess afterwards.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's problematic?
I think it's fair. I think a lot, an ounce of prevention goes a long way kind of thing. And I look back on my marriage in moments where I was not being the spiritual leader, and it led to some hard times. So whereas if I had, it would have prevented a lot of that stuff. So being proactive in it. When I got married, I had no idea how to be married. I was 21 and just a kid pretty much, just still in college and had no clue what it meant to be married. And then, of course, in relation, had no clue what it meant to lead someone else spiritually. Yeah. And so it took me a while to figure that stuff out. And if I had known at the beginning, then it could have prevented some heartache and some arguments and a bunch of other stuff. But going through those problems also made me a better spiritual leader. You know? And so it's hard to really regret not knowing, because now I know, just through experience and through mistakes. That's how you grow.
Oh, sure.
Grow through mistakes. But I've just never really put as much emphasis on it as I really should have, as I realize now how important it is. I was about to say burden, but it's not a burden. It's what a responsibility it is as men to lead our families spiritually, not just our wives necessarily, but our kids and everybody, but our wives first and foremost, I believe.
You're talking about making mistakes, and it just made me think of this. There's 2 types of people in this world. There's people that will listen to wisdom and the mistakes of others, and there's some people that just need to pee on the electric fence themselves. Yeah. And so I have peed on a lot of electric fences, metaphorically speaking, in my life. And I wish I had listened to other people, or sought out the information, like sought out the wisdom of others, because I've sat there, and this is a good discussion for our mentor episode that's coming up in a couple weeks. But I wish I had gone out and asked questions before making a decision on something. Well, talking about marriage and not knowing things, I'm going to resist the temptation to go down a deep theological route, but it's worth mentioning. Like, our marriage is supposed to reflect that of our relationship with Christ. Like, our relationship with Christ is indicative of how we treat our marriage. We read about it in Ephesians 5, women, submit yourselves to your husband as you submit yourself to Christ. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. So, like, clearly there's a relationship between Christ and the church and Christ and us. It is supposed to be similar to a relationship between a husband and wife. And that's pretty consistent with, like, when you're baptized, you're not going to know everything about Jesus. You're just not. All you really need to know is you're committing yourself to him. Because you look at stories throughout the New Testament where all they hear one sermon and they say, yep, I'm going to commit my life to Christ. It's the same thing with marriage. You don't have to know everything. You're not going to know everything about your wife, but you're going to find out things about your spouse that you did not know. The key is when you get married that you are making that commitment. You're making that commitment for life. It's when you find out new things about your spouse that you're still holding on to that commitment that you made in front of God and in front of the friends and family that you had with you at the wedding. Like, you made that commitment. Now it's time to stick to it.
Being the spiritual leader is, like you were talking about, there's a difference between being a boss and being a leader. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people take that term spiritual leader to be more of a boss, where you just kind of tell them, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to believe it. This is where we're going to go to church. This is it. And there's moments in marriages and in your family life where you might have to be decisive like that. How do you stay strong and decisive, but also be humble at the same time and make those decisions, but not be overbearing and demanding?
That's a good question that you asked. It's like, it's more than being a spiritual leader is more than just making decisions of, like, where we're going to church and all that. It's like a day-to-day lifestyle and process. So what does that look like?
I think it's encouragement, and kind of like our verse says, do everything you do in love. Is if we're doing these things out of love, then of course encouragement and guidance, stuff like that comes along with it. And so we're not dragging people along, or that's not the goal. It's to guide. And what I've found too is sometimes when I just finally do make a decision to maybe, hey, let's go to church here, we're gonna do this or that, it relieves a lot of pressure from my wife and maybe my kids, because we're just kind of floundering, like going, well, we don't know what to do. We don't know the right thing. And sometimes you do have to just be decisive and make a decision. And then, because you can correct your decision later if you need to. Yeah. But we do have to make one. And I think that's part of being the spiritual leader, is when you come to a crossroads, of course, you talk to your wife about it, maybe your kids about it, depending on their ages and their input level. And you just decide what you believe is best for your family, but you do it together. I think that's a big part of it, is not just unilaterally making decisions. I don't know that that's really being a spiritual leader. That's what bosses do. They make unilateral decisions without, any thought of consequences for anyone else.
I forget how you phrase it, but one thing I've been learning is you can't force people to do something. It's that old adage, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. I can lead my son I can teach my son about Christ. I can lead him to the gospel, but I can't make him submit to Christ. That's a decision that he has to make on his own. Spiritual leadership is not a passive role, but it's not it's like you said, it's not dragging them along and forcing them to do something. It is leading them.
I think a lot of it comes with intentionality.
Yeah. I think it reminds me of the verse that Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. It's like, I cannot be a hypocrite in this situation. I need to be imitating Christ and pursuing Christ, and then giving them the tools and the guidance to follow me in that path. I didn't mean to cut you off just then.
No, I'm just adding. Well, how do you intentionally encourage your wife's relationship with God, or do you?
I think mostly I'm recognizing when she's doing something for the kingdom, and then I praise her in that regard, or I try to.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm not good at saying, hey, I don't know. Maybe this is a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I don't feel necessarily like I'm doing a great job as a spiritual leader. I don't know. I look at all my flaws, and I'm sure my wife is looking at everything and saying, oh, you're doing great. But I don't know. I still see my flaws, and I still see, well, I could do better than this. I don't read my Bible enough. I don't fast hardly at all. I certainly don't pray enough. Like I see all these shortcomings that I have. And I'm like, I should be doing better than this, but I'm not. And I don't know if that's just a phase that I'm going through, like just like a season where I'm just struggling, or if it's something deeper. I don't know if that is helpful at all. I mean, it's, if nothing else, it's vulnerability. How do you encourage your wife spiritually?
So I encourage her. She's Bible study on Wednesday nights, and she used to go to Tuesday night Bible study, all girls stuff. And so I encourage her to go to those things, even when she's not feeling great, or she's tired, or just doesn't really feel like socializing. I try to just encourage her, lovingly encourage her to go, and just remind her, you'll never regret going. Mm-hmm. You always love it when you come home, stuff like that. And I think even being intentional myself about doing my Bible study or my reading, she sees that, and it's an intentional example, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing that for my kids as well. Or at least I hope I am. I hope that's the result that we're getting, is that they see their dad, they see their mom doing those things, reading their Bible or going to Bible study, even when it's not convenient, or going to men's breakfast or something that's going on, church related or spiritual growth related, and still doing it anyway. Mm-hmm. And I believe that that's a big part of spiritual leadership too. It's doing the things that, like you said, if you have to be Christ-like to love like Christ, mm-hmm. right? So it's the same way. If we want our kids and wives to be one way, and then we've got to be that way as well.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be the only source of Christ to our family. Like we should not be the only source of spiritual growth for our family.
And we shouldn't just do that for our families only.
Yes.
In the same light.
Yeah, it should be we are looking to, it's like what we say with this in all these episodes, is like we're trying to be the men that God wants us to be, and we're encouraging people to follow along. But like I have a perspective on the gospel, and I share that as often as I can, but I recognize that I shouldn't be the only person in their lives that talks about Jesus. They can hear it in the church service, but also classes, and like you were talking about, like small group devos, and like little ladies' night out get-togethers, or men's prayer breakfasts, men's prayer breakfasts. Do you feel like you're a good spiritual leader?
Most of the time, no.
Okay.
Sometimes I do.
Yeah.
In that I feel like I'm being the example that I'm supposed to be. Sometimes there was a time where we were struggling with church decisions, and for a long time when we were in Texas, I let my wife kind of do that, and I was not fulfilling my role at all. Mm-hmm. I had almost no input, and was just not in a great place in that regard. And then we got to kind of the same point up here, And I knew it was time for a change. And so I just made the decision to start trying.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere else. Let's check it out. And then that's all it took on my part, was just doing that. And so it's super easy when you look at it. A lot of times there's some imposter syndrome that comes with being the spiritual leader, because it's like, what do I know? Like, I've talked about it before, like with the church in New Braunfels, where I didn't want to teach because I didn't know enough. And it's like, what do you mean? I don't know how to tell people what to do. I don't know how to teach these people I don't know. Same thing with my family. I get caught sometimes making that excuse. Well, I just don't know. I'm not mature. I'm not old enough. I'm not an old man yet. I haven't lived enough life to know the answer.
Yeah.
And then I think that's where some of that decisiveness just comes in, is you just decide. And then you can change your mind if you need to. I don't think it's all detrimental. Like in that moment, it's life or death. Generally, it's not. When you're just talking about spiritual leadership, at least here. And so I think it's just making a decision and being intentional. I think intentionality is a big part of all of this. If you were intentional, your wife sees it, your kids see it. If it's just on a whim and on the fly, I could argue that you're not really being a leader. You're just kind of you're just living, or you're not living, you're letting life happen to you. And some of that goes back to the respond versus react stuff. Is, reacting, you're going about life just reacting to situations. You're not, what you talked about earlier is preparation, being prepared and a little bit of foresight and starting, way back when, or way ahead of a problem. Whereas a response is a calculated thing where you're using your mind, you're using your brain, thinking of all the possibilities of something and how your actions have consequences and will affect other people. And so I think being intentional and goes to responding. You're intentionally thinking and not reacting, not being passive, not allowing life to just happen to you. I think you've got to be active in that. You can't be passive as a spiritual leader.
And you were saying, like, I don't know exactly how to tie this in, but I can't be bothered with transitions. God doesn't really care where you are or what decision you make. And that sounds very cold and callous, but here's my point. God, from the beginning, God was interested in a partnership. And so he has a will, but that will is for all to come to know Christ. And he can use you wherever you decide to go. Like if you decide that you want to be a missionary in Africa, he can use you. If you decide that you want to stay here and work at a bank or work on a ranch or sell houses or whatever, like he can use you wherever you are, and he will use you wherever you are. The thing to do is, whatever decision you make, you need to be looking to Christ. It needs to be Christ focused. And when you have a decision to make, have we talked about when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else? It comes up a lot when I'm talking with the college guys I work with. It's like, when you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else, inevitably. And oftentimes you're saying no to a lot of things. Counter to that, if you say no to something, you could be saying yes to a lot of other things as well. And I immediately forgot why I brought that up. Oh, so whenever you're faced with the decision of, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? Am I going to work? Am I going to teach this class or am I not? Am I going to take this job or am I not? Like, look at, how can I serve Christ? And like, you're going to be able to serve Christ in practically whatever you do. You just have to have that mindset of, I'm going to serve Christ. And to that extent, like when you have that mindset, God will use you, because he's looking for a partnership. He's not looking for mechanisms to operate his machinery. He's working for someone to work with him. I don't know if that's a great analogy, but we're going to go with it.
Yeah.
One thing, you said that you're not sure if you're a good spiritual leader in your family. Most of the time, you're not sure that you are. I think is, how did you put it?
Most of the time, I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, most of the time, you said that most of the time you feel like you're not a spiritual leader. I feel the same, because I think we don't. I think a lot of it has to do with we don't see the immediate fruits of our labor.
And that goes back to the planting seeds thing we've talked about many times.
Yeah.
So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Because like if you cut down a tree, if you fell a tree, you see the tree on the ground, you know it's done. When you're building a fence, you know that it's done. When you load the dishwasher, you see the dishes are clean now. Like you see the immediate fruits of your labor. When you're a spiritual leader, you don't always see that. But like you said, it's planting seeds. And you jumped ahead of me a little bit, but that's okay.
Oh, my bad.
That's perfect because it led into, do you know what the fastest growing grass is?
Bamboo?
Bamboo.
Oh,
do you
cool.
know? Yeah. Do you know how long it takes for it to start growing?
I don't.
It's like 5 years.
Really?
You plant the seeds and like 5 years later, you don't see anything for about 5 years and then it starts growing. And then it grows like really tall within a year.
Yeah, I got a bunch in my backyard that won't go away.
Yeah, it doesn't. Because that first 5 years, it's growing a deep root system. It's like the roots are going deep and they're going out and wide, and it's developing its infrastructure underground so you can't see it. But then once it hits above the ground, it shoots up as tall as bamboo shoots up, which is what?
Well, we can get really, really,
20
really
feet
tall, 20,
so.
30 feet.
Yeah. Like it's...
Depending on the type of bamboo.
Yeah. And I'm not a horticultural specialist, so...
Why not?
I've chosen to waste my time doing other things. Not that horticulture is a waste of time, but I've chosen to spend my time doing other things. Thanks again for listening to Stand Like Men podcast. We'd love it if you would like and subscribe, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to send us an email, you can reach us at standlikemen@gmail.com.
Our verse is 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
Be watchful.
Stand firm in the faith. Act like men. Be strong.
Let all that you do be done in love.